All right, welcome back. We're going to continue on in the Olivet Discourse. I've got 10 powerful closing points to verify a first century fulfillment. Let's get right into it. Number one, the parables and utterances Jesus spoke of that are in Matthew chapters 21, chapter 22, the judgments he declared in Matthew 23, and the predictions he made in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 of the city and temple being destroyed. They all have verified fulfillment as having transpired in the first century. I encourage you to study those chapters of Matthew 21, 22, and 23 leading up to this Olivet Discourse. Number two, the questions made by the disciples were in direct response to the declarations made by Jesus of these verified first century events. And obviously they were with him and heard what he had to say in these previous chapters of Matthew that I had made reference to. Number three, after the predictions by Jesus of the events that have been verified as having been fulfilled in the first century, the question from the disciples to Jesus about his coming in Matthew 24:3, in light of what they just heard about the temple being destroyed and their concept, not ours, but their concept of what a coming would be, based on their knowledge of the Old Testament judgment comings, we referenced, all point to a judgment first century coming. You might check Isaiah 19, first few verses on that. Number four, in response to Jesus' prediction of the temple's destruction, the disciples had to have known that this would end the old covenant order of things that was going on in Jerusalem. Obviously, it was going on by apostate Jews after the new covenant had been ushered in. So their question about the end of the age makes the most sense when put together with a judgment coming and the fact that the Jewish age they were familiar with the old covenant order that did end in the first century as Jesus predicted. Number five, the use of the phrase "this generation" in the Olivet Discourse in light of its use in every other place in the New Testament, and the fact that Jesus never said "that generation" or "these generations." This is direct, clear language to the disciples and the contemporaries of Jesus that clearly implies what Scripture and history confirms, that the events all did transpire in the first century. The direct first-person plural language to the disciples, where Jesus said to them, "you," not "they," in Matthew 24, verse 6, 9, 15, 25, 26, and 34, also clearly shows the events would happen to them and in the first century. We've all confirmed this through Scripture and history. And there's a whole lot more out there than I have mentioned. I've just hit the tip of the iceberg here, so you can study this further if you like. There's lots of books available. Number seven. Their dramatic hyperbolic language is the same type of language used in the Old Testament in reference to past judgments. Therefore, the same language used in the Olivet Discourse can in the very same way referring to past judgments, the past judgment, in this case, having happened in the first century. Number eight now. The reference to fleeing Judea in Matthew 24:16 clearly indicates a localized area that events are to take place. Jesus would have used language to indicate a larger area if the events were to take place in a large area, but he did no such thing. He said it exactly the way he meant to say it to apply to the time and area exactly intended, as we have shown. Number nine, the fact that all the signs can be verified as happening in the first century leading up to the city and temple's destruction. All the signs happening, all verify this along with everything else we're presented here to have happened in the first century. Now this last point here goes beyond the New Testament into the book of Daniel, specifically the prophecies in Daniel chapter 2, 7, specifically 9, also verses and prophecies in 11 and 12 if you study the book of Daniel. In no place, way, shape, or form in any of those prophecies is there any indication of any gap anywhere, anytime. And all the prophecies can be verified as having taken place in the first century and before. Specifically, if you refer to Daniel 9, 24 to 27, 70-week prophecy, there is a gap that is speculated and inserted into that prophecy between the 69th and 70th weeks that we are supposed and assumed to be living in this gap period. However, that prophecy in no way, shape, matter, or form even gives a hint of any gap that is added in and speculated in by commentators and people with a dispensational view of these things, wherein this view is documented as having begun in the 1830s. We may talk about more of that on another video. All right, now I'm going to give 10 questions pertaining to a first century fulfillment of the Olivet Discourse. This is to challenge you, our friends, to give your comments. You can, put your comment on which question or however you do it. Comment with a video, however you like to do it. There's a lot of debates and discussion on this, and we welcome all that. Number 1, could there be any more relevant generation for the judgments to be executed on other than the very generation that crucified their Messiah? Number 2, do the disciples question Jesus in response to any other events other than those we know for sure happened in the first century? Number 3, why would the disciples randomly question Jesus about his coming and the end of the age in response to his prediction of the temple's destruction if they weren't connected? Number 4, when the disciples asked Jesus about his coming, would their idea of Jesus' coming be more closely related to their concept of the judgment comings from the Old Testament that they were familiar with, especially when the New Testament wasn't written yet? Or would their concept of Jesus' coming be more closely related to our concept some 1980 years later? All right. Number 6, with the disciples' familiarity with the phrase "this generation" being used by Jesus in every other place in the New Testament, would they expect the meaning of the phrase to be totally different from the way it was used in the Olivet Discourse? And if so, why? And I skipped number 5, so let's hit that now. Would the disciples be more likely to be asking about the end of the age in reference to the age and that the temple was a huge part of, or would they be more likely to be asking about the end of an age they had no knowledge of and weren't familiar with, weren't exposed to yet, and had no connection to the temple? All right, now we're at 7 since we reversed 5 and 6. Number 7, why did Jesus use "they" in place of "you" in the discourse if a future generation was in view? Number 8, why didn't Jesus use "that generation" or "these generations" if that's really the time frame the Olivet Discourse deals with? Number 9, with the same hyperbolic language that's used in the Old Testament to describe past events, couldn't the same type of language that's used in this Olivet Discourse also be indicating that it was a past event, especially when we've shown all the signs taking place in the first century? Number 10, why didn't Jesus describe a larger area than Judea if the Olivet Discourse is describing worldwide events to indicate a future tribulation period? Welcome your response, and thanks for your listening, and God bless you richly.